Peace, 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 everybody. Come on in, come on in. Thank you for coming to Changing Life on the Spectrum, episode 1. And we are thankful for everybody coming in, but we want you to get comfortable. We want you to go ahead and get that comforter, put it over you, find that nice soft spot in the couch, on your bed, get those box of tissues, because the first episode, we're going to talk about when you first start sensing that something's not quite right with your child. And then we're going to talk about when you get that diagnosis and how to deal with it. And just to let you all know and be able to see what it is that we as parents go through when you get that diagnosis, and the things that go through your mind, the things that you have to come to grips with within yourself, within your family, thinking about your child, and so on and so forth. So that's why we're saying go ahead and grab the tissues. We'll give you a couple seconds. Go ahead and make the run, because it can get really emotional. You know, brothers, don't hold it in. Don't hold it in. Just let it out. Because, you know, I've been there, and I know if you have been or are about to go through it, it's not something that you can really just hold back. So let us go ahead and talk about it.
Did we say our names first?
You're right. Okay. So I'm Brother James, and this is my wife,
Nicole.
And once again, thank you. And we hope that you went on ahead and got those tissues real quick.
Most definitely.
Because like I said, when it came to our son McKeel, we first started to notice that his speech was being delayed, because he really wasn't talking at a certain point. As a matter of fact, it was my mom who helped point out that when he wanted something, he would point, or he would say, verbalize something, but we couldn't really necessarily understand it. But my mom gave us the hint. She said if he says the same thing 2 to 3 or more times, he's trying to tell you something. And she told us that at that point, just ask him to go get it. That's going to be your best bet, so that, you know, things can keep moving and you'll begin to learn grunts, certain hand movements, and so on and so forth. And so I started to notice that McKeel wasn't developing as much as I thought that he should. You know, being a spiritual person and being a male, you know, you think your son is going to be stronger than you or just as smart as you, and so on and so forth. So when I started to notice the delay, that's when I mentioned it to Nicole and was like, do you think something's going on?
And, you know, I didn't want there to be anything wrong. But even going back a little bit farther than that, I remember you mentioning something when he was a baby that you thought something might be off. And he had other medical issues going on at the time. So I really didn't have the mental capacity to handle anything else or dealing with anything else at the time. So I just, said no. Um, but inside praying that he was fine. And the other thing that happened around the same time you had the conversation with your mom, you had also talked to the daycare center
Mm-hmm.
that he had recently started going to, because my mom got sick and she had been babysitting him while we were at work during the day. So he was fairly new to the center, but it was even more apparent with him being around other children his age that he was behind with speech. So, with him showing no signs of having speech delays, and the daycare center was also having problems with him sleeping at nap time. Like they had to actually find a baby swing to put him in to calm him during nap time because he just could not sleep. He couldn't self regulate his emotions and regulate his himself to be able to fall asleep like the other children could during nap time. And we had seen that before when he was younger as a baby. He would wake up almost every night. He would wake up. Um, so that wasn't something that was new to us. We thought maybe we also thought that maybe he was having some problems with adjusting to going to the new daycare,
Right.
since he had always been either with us or my mom. So um, the daycare center director, Pastor Sherry, she recommended that we um, do the child find um, assessment through the county that we lived in, and they would come out to our home and assess him for his speech delay. So we did that, but it took several months for them to even get back to us. They were behind, they had a backlog. So I think we reached out to them maybe sometime during the spring, and they didn't actually come to evaluate him until like July or August of that year. And he was 2 years old at the time. So they came to our home. Several people came. They evaluated him. Um, and then they said that he qualified for speech and language therapy services at his daycare center. So this went on for probably about a month and a half. And then they said that they needed us to come in for an IEP meeting. They felt like he would qualify for additional services since he was about to turn 3 in November of that year. And this was in 2015. And we needed to come in to do an IEP meeting and to figure out his placement. So, what school he would be attending after he turned 3. And they wanted to discuss some other things um, that they picked up on while working with him at the daycare center. So my schedule was a lot more flexible than my husband's at the time. So I attended the IEP meeting, and at first they had me meet with a child psychologist alone before I went into the meeting with everyone else, which I thought was a little odd. But we talked for a few minutes. We went over some things that the assessors had and the therapist had seen and observed in McKeel during their time with him. And that was when she told me that they believed that McKeel had autism. And it felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. It was traumatic. It was I can't even give it a word. It was just life-changing. And at first I was in denial. I had all these questions. I was, you know, we came to you for speech delays. And
Right.
now you're saying autism. Like, where did that come from? Like, that came out of nowhere. Um so, in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, we're going to get a second opinion. We're going to have him assessed ourselves. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. But for the moment, I accepted what she had to say. And She mentioned to me that a lot of parents would not want to indicate that their child has autism on their IEP, and I needed to make that decision about whether or not to indicate that. And having some past experience with my older children with IEPs, I knew it was important to have the most accurate diagnosis so your child could get the services that they need. So I said that, I did not have a problem with them indicating on the IEP that he had autism, um, because I knew it would be easier to adjust that later than to not include it from the start. Um, so then we went into the IEP meeting. I'm still shell shocked, but I knew that we had to have this meeting and, do what needed to be done to get McKeel the help that he needed. And I really can't tell you much about what happened during the meeting because a lot of it is a blur.
I wasn't even thinking about it.
Yeah, but I do know that I could barely wait to finish, to get out to my car and call my husband to tell him, what had just um, been discussed. And, I think we were both in agreement that we would definitely move forward with getting the second opinion. Um, Again, a lot of that is a blur for me. Do you remember much about that conversation?
To be honest with you, not really. Um, I think what happened to both of us is, again, we had to try to come to grips with just hearing the words, your child has autism. Like Nicole said, we're thinking speech. I'm knowing something is wrong, so I'm not necessarily shocked or taken too far back. But autism was definitely not something I was prepared to hear. Nothing. I didn't think that would be on the table. I was ready to hear some other things, but not the autism.
Right.
So both of us had to come to grips with it. Um, Although, again, there were signs that were showing up, like at the daycare. I remember one of the personnel there pulled me aside and was like, "Mr. Green, I just wanted to tell you that McKeel did something that scared the crap out of me." And so, of course, I'm looking at her like, "What? What did he do?" And she said that, well, he stood up on the top of the sliding board, and instead of sliding down, he jumped in the air and landed on the slide on his knees and came down that way. She was telling me that basically her heart dropped into her stomach at that point, like, oh my God, what is he getting ready to do? But these are things that begin to happen, and we're telling you these stories because we don't want you to wait, especially in the black community. We wait too long. When you start to see something and question it, get it checked.
Right. And I'm going to add to that, in that when I was talking to the psychologist before the IEP meeting, that was one thing she mentioned, because I asked her, well, why do some parents not want to indicate autism on the IEP? And she said sometimes it's embarrassment, sometimes it's denial, um, sometimes it's an absolute refusal just to see the signs themselves. So, rather than their child getting all of the services that they need, they choose to deny that the diagnosis exists.
Now, don't get us wrong. I do understand that another aspect of that is money. Sometimes you don't want to come to grips with something that's going to add an extra cost. You're already struggling. But you end up hurting yourself and your child in the long run, because early prevention is always the best way to go. When you begin to see signs that something is wrong, please don't deny it. We understand you want to evaluate it. You want to give a little bit of time to see if it does just change on its own. Maybe it is something that the child is just going through. But once you pass that timeline, act immediately as best as you can. It will mean the world of difference to your child and to yourself. We were blessed that we were able to come to grips. And the first thing that Nicole did, once we came to grips with it, once we took a deep breath, immediately went to work researching.
Right. So, but first, we we did research on where to get our own assessment done.
Right.
Now, thankfully, we had decent health insurance that we could get him evaluated on our own. Um, Now, of course, the evaluation through the county that was free, but um, we weren't sure what the cost was going to be to have him evaluated, on our own. And thankfully, it was just a matter of paying our copay, and which was I think $35 at the time. So we were able to afford it. Um, did some research, and we decided on Mount Washington Pediatric Hospital to have him evaluated.
Now, to touch on how to come to grips with the diagnosis, one of the first things that you have to do is you got to calm yourself down. You're gonna have to find a quiet space. You can be on your own. Take some deep breaths. Don't judge yourself. Number one, don't judge yourself. You don't need to add any extra pain or stress. And don't judge God either, because some of us do that too. I'm a good person. I've done this. I've done that. I don't deserve this. But no, don't even. It's not worth taking yourself through that, because that doesn't help your child, and that doesn't help you to get the situation under the most amount of control you can. Main thing is, yes, go talk to God, and yes, you can ask, but ask humbly, but know that He wouldn't put something on you can't handle. So it's going to take faith. It's definitely going to take spirit. It's going to take you training yourself. But that's the main thing, is you have to come to grips once you see it. Once you get it tested and you get the diagnosis, now it's time to prepare yourself to get in the trenches. Don't backtrack, and like I said, don't destroy yourself over coulda, woulda, shoulda, and stuff like that. Because again, that's all in the past. You can't change it.
And it's going to waste time because,
Right.
You want them getting services ASAP. And even though we made the decision relatively quickly to go with Mount Washington, we had to wait,
Right.
to get that appointment. And the appointments these days are triple the amount of time of what we waited. So we got in relatively quickly, and I think there was a cancellation at the last minute, so they called us and said they had an earlier appointment. But in the meantime, we moved forward with McKeel starting in the early childhood program at the local school. So it was like a pre-K program for him. And the first day was hard because they started him, because he had been diagnosed at a moderate level, they started him with the children that were the most affected not just by autism, but there were a number of different disabilities that the children in his classroom um, had been diagnosed with. So it was very quiet. Some of the children were completely nonverbal, and yeah, it was very hard meeting the teacher and seeing the other children there, and but at the same time it was somewhat relieving because I felt like we were doing something, you know to taking steps in the right direction to get him the help that he needed, that we couldn't necessarily give him, or that we weren't necessarily equipped to give him.
And speaking on that, one of the other things you must come to grips with is, that proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. Yeah, that's you got you gonna learn that very quickly. Once you get that diagnosis, you're gonna learn quickly you have to assemble the team. Meaning, you gotta get your family in line and help them to understand what's going on, how to act appropriately, which would be one of your hardest tasks, is to get everybody on the same page, because everybody has to be understanding and learn not to react as they would a typical child. He's going to do some things that you're not going to understand, or she, that you're not going to understand. And you got to come to grips with that, and you've got to get your team to come to grips with that.
Like climbing your furniture like it's Mount Everest. Or our son would climb on the sofa and hang from the door jambs,
right,
in between
yes,
the
I remember
rooms.
that.
And that's a very small amount of space for your fingers for him to try to hang from the door frames in between rooms was very scary. Climbing up on end tables and jumping off,
Right.
it was just it could be very scary.
And the other thing is, speaking to my brothers, you got to be able to come to grips with the fact that yes, you have to be a disciplinarian, but you're going to have to switch it up. You're going to have to tweak it. It's not going to work necessarily the same way that you grew up. Um, and we too, as men, need to take that time and really come to grips. And if you got to cry, man, cry. Don't hold it in. Um, and end up hurting yourself. You gotta let it out. Like I said, talk to the God that you know by whatever name you subscribe to him, and you gotta start moving forward. You know, look at it as an opportunity to now you have to get to know your child. You're going to have to pay attention more to your child. And I know this sounds wrong to a degree, but that actually is better, because now one of the things that I learned from dealing with an autistic child is that you have to pay attention. One of the things that I tell everybody that I end up talking to through NPFAT is you have to study your child, because your child will teach you how to teach them. But that only happens if you're paying attention.
And if they feel comfortable enough.
Right.
They have to have that safe space. They have to feel safe with you. Um, and that's going to be key. Um, Thankfully, part of our team, part of our village was our daycare center, because our county didn't have a full day pre-K program. So we were able to set it up so that the bus would come and pick him up from the daycare center in the morning and drop him off after his day ended in the middle of the day. So that was very convenient. As we did research and learned more about autism, we were able to let the child care center workers know, as well as the director. Um, and they really did pull through for us and worked with us. Um, so thankfully, they became part of our village in dealing um, with this. So we didn't feel alone in that. Um, and again, family, very important. Um,
And once again, that's why I use the word team. You need a team, meaning daycare. Everybody needs to be on the same page. School. Everybody needs to be on the same page. Teachers, after school, everybody needs to be on the same page. You have to get past the thought of, well, I really don't want to talk to nobody. I don't want nobody to know. No, 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 that's not going to work. You're going to have to let the teachers know your child's specific needs and some of the things that they do, their quirks, so that
right,
the teacher will already be looking for it. And when it happens, it doesn't blow up into something where you're getting that call.
right,
We need you to come to school. We
right,
need you to come to school. We need you to come to school. Because they know. And then, especially, this is one of the hardest things to come to grips with, especially in this day and time, because everything is so crazy. You will have to find the balance between how much you're willing to tell about your child to people outside your home. But it is something you're going to have to deal with, because it's going to make it easier on you and your child. Again, when your team knows, he's shaking his arm, that means yada, 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 yada.
right,
So people can be prepared for it. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's like, oh, it's coming.
right. And it's especially important when your child can't communicate clearly,
Right.
because they can't say what's wrong with them. They're going to have more behaviors because they can't communicate. Can you imagine being an adult and you can't communicate your needs to someone? They know that they're getting frustrated because you don't understand what they're trying to say to you. So, you have to have a lot of grace.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying let everything go, but there has to be a lot of grace. There has to be empathy, you know, because they're struggling. They know that you're not under they're looking at you like you're stupid because you don't understand what they're saying.
Absolutely.
Because they know what they're trying to communicate, but they don't realize that you're not, understanding them because of that communication barrier. That their brains aren't developed enough at that age to get there.
Right. And again, for you to be the best advocate for your child, you're going to have to, again, learn to stay calm, give grace, study them, to learn them. And then, like I just said, try to figure out that balance. Because I know right now, especially for us as black people, it is extremely scary. It's like you're not even sure whether you should tell the police department that you have an autistic child,
Or neighbors.
or neighbors that you have
Yeah.
an autistic child.
Because how do you know that your neighbor isn't, someone who preys on children?
And,
You
and,
know,
and not only that, how do you know that your neighbor is going to know how to respond correctly?
right? Or
Even
even the
after,
bus driver.
yeah, well, we were blessed in that. We've been very blessed. We've been very blessed that we've, for the most part, had good experiences with our team players.
And they loved our son.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's hard not to love McHugh. But these are things that we're saying to you when you get the diagnosis. These are some of the ways that you can begin to cope with it, because not only do you have to come to grips with it within yourself, but again, you have to also stand strong for your child.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so the more prepared you are, the better you feel about the situation. The more your team is together, then the child relaxes, because I don't think we realize sometimes how much children study us, and they react based off of what they see us do.
Exactly.
So if you are nervous or you're a wreck, you're not talking to anybody, then one of the things that we learned is that children sometimes will evaluate things from themselves and say, am I the problem? Why is it that whenever mommy comes home, she looks sad, and but she don't look sad at me? Daddy's always yelling at me because I'm always jumping off the sofa, but I'll never hurt myself. So what is he upset for?
Right.
Which is something that I did go through with McKeel, and I learned something. Autistic children live by the truth that they experience. Meaning, just like I just said, McKeel couldn't come to grips with me saying to him, don't jump off the bed or the sofa because you could hurt yourself. Now, even though he wasn't as verbal, he obviously understood what I was saying to him, but he was saying to himself, but I've jumped off this bed 100 times. Not even a scratch.
Right.
What are you worried about, Dad?
Exactly.
What's the problem? I know what I'm doing.
Right.
And because they don't have a filter, and you will learn this quickly, they don't have a filter. It's either, a lot of times it's this or that.
Yes.
I know this, so Dad, Mom, I don't care who you are trying to tell me something else. No, I know this.
Yes. They have to experience it firsthand, and they don't like change.
No,
They don't like change.
not at all. So these are things that, we're trying to prepare you.
Yes.
We're trying to prepare you so that, again, when you see something going on, and especially if it goes past a certain time, get it checked. Forget all that other stuff that you're going to tell yourself to try to talk yourself out of it. You have to understand that you got to get this done quickly.
And unfortunately, pediatricians are not always helpful because they're not trained. They don't get a lot of training, or if any, in diagnosing autism. Our pediatrician said, oh, we don't see it. But I mean, they would see our child for maybe 10 minutes, 15 tops, maybe once, twice a year. That's not enough time for them to diagnose your child.
Right.
And thank God we didn't listen to them because they were completely wrong. And they couldn't even point us in the direction of, where to go. So while it was great that we were able to get that diagnosis for free from the county, most of the information that we got was from the diagnosis that we got through our health insurance through Mount Washington, because they give you a full report. There is tons of paperwork that you have to fill out. There was paperwork that the daycare center had to fill out.
Yes.
That his teacher had to fill out. Like it is exhausting, but it helps them to have the full picture that they need to give you the most accurate diagnosis. So, thankfully, at the end of the report, they do give you a lot of tips for what specifically can help your child and can help the people that are working with your child. And they also give you information on local resources in your area that you can call upon to get additional information. Now, even though McKeel's diagnosis was 7 years ago,
Right.
yeah, that's 7 years now, there is a ton of more information out there now than what was even out there 7 years ago. So, you know, it's a lot easier today to get information than it was in 2015. So I would say, get that evaluation through your local county. Every school system across the country in the United States has to offer those early intervention services by law. So, you can Google child find or early intervention, or early intervention assessments through your local school district's website and get information. Um, Also, the daycare center had that information as well. So it seems like they distribute it to like local daycare centers in your area. So there's different avenues that you can go through to find out how you can get help and get assessments for your child.
But it's very important that you make sure that you do your research, because you are definitely going to find that you are going to have to educate everybody else. Your pediatrician does not have the time to go get training to understand the ins and out of of autism.
And we're not saying every pediatrician, but the ones that we've encountered and that other parents in our group, and support groups that we frequent have mentioned having the same issue. So,
Well, I'm saying that because of the fact that they just don't have the time. I'm not saying that they're bad people.
oh
I'm
no,
just
definitely
saying
not.
that they don't have the time to really put in but so much research. And that's why it's best for you as the parent to get as much research as you can, because there are going to be times you're going to have to check them. You're going to have to be strong enough to say, with all due respect, according to this research, blah, 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 blah. And sometimes you'll find that they'll look at you like a deer in the headlights because they have no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
So it's best for you to try your best to be up on as much research. And that's why you join groups. Join autistic groups of people who can share research, and you can begin to learn different things. Nobody can learn it all by themselves.
Right.
Just because we just don't have the time and something else to help you to understand, you're gonna have to come to grips with. Having children, we all know you're gonna lose a ton of sleep. Yeah, it's a lot different when it's autistic children because it doesn't stop. It's just, oh, now they're two. They're sleeping through the night.
No.
Not necessarily when it comes to autistic children.
Right.
And we have a saying, an autistic child is an autistic child, meaning each one is different. So we have three, and each one, like any other child, have three different personalities, but they also have three different types of symptoms.
Right.
Three different types of problems, issues. And you're going to have to bring your mind up to a space where you can be ready to deal with that.
And I think I mentioned to you recently, it's like you never get out of the toddler stage because you're constantly having to move things and hide things and lock things up. We have locks on our on our kitchen cabinets. We have we tried putting a lock on the basement door, but it didn't work out too well. But
And the refrigerator.
yes, because they can. What's worse about them never getting out of the toddler stage is that they're taller now, so they can reach things that toddlers can't reach, and they can reach things that are almost out of reach for me. So,
And another thing that you'll have to come to grips with is that they generally, as with all human beings, when you're less in one thing, you get greater in something else. So you can never underestimate your child. I'm sorry.
No.
They're a lot smarter than what you think they are.
Yes, they are.
And like any other child, they learn how to take advantage of situations. They're generally not liars. And even when they try to lie, they're very bad at it most of the time.
Yes.
But they are still curious. They will get into things. And sometimes whatever part of the mind or brain or abilities that has the greater, yeah, it goes to the extreme sometimes, because we go through them taking apart stuff just because, ooh, I wonder what happened. And things like that. So we're just trying to give you a heads up. Just giving you a heads up so you understand. We're trying to keep it light, but to be quite honest with you, if I wasn't somewhat already prepared, in the sense that I was being allowed to see that something was going on with McKeel prior to getting the diagnosis, it was like, then I was coming to grips with it. My dear wife was a little slower coming to grips with it, but she did.
Well, and the backstory on that is that our son was born with a birth defect.
Mm-hmm.
So he had been through 3 surgeries.
Yes.
Before that time. So we had been through a lot
Mm-hmm.
with our son. Not to mention that the year before he got diagnosed was the year that my mother had a very extensive medical event that caused her to not be able to speak or take care of herself.
Right.
So that was traumatic for me. And I lost my dad in 2015. And he had been sick for months. So, my mental capacity to take on more was very low. So, thankfully my husband was there, and he gave me grace that I definitely needed. Because, sometimes you get to the point where you feel like you just can't take one more thing
Right.
in that moment. So, you take what you can.
And again, that's why we emphasize you need your team.
Yes.
We were very blessed that my mother has been an RN for like 4 decades. And she's been in every ward of the hospital. So she's pretty much seen it all. Um, and when she heard about the diagnosis, again, she didn't boo hoo, boo hoo. She went to work, let me study, let me figure out what happens, let me figure out how I can help them. She's been waiting for her grandbaby for so long. Nothing was going to come between her and her grandbaby growing up the way that she wanted them to grow up. Um, and so that's why, you got to have the team. Surround yourself with people who know different aspects that you need and are good in their field. There's some out there. I mean, of course, we know there's a lot that's not good. There's a lot that's not as qualified as you would think they should be. But that's why prayer, meditation is key, because you have to keep yourself on an even level for yourself and for your child. We use Reiki, and Reiki helps us to keep things down as far as pain, stress, anxiety. We use it for the children, um, to help them to calm down some. Um, and that's basically from this point on, from the diagnosis point on, that's what you have to do. Put your team together.
Right.
And there are good people out there. Um, Again, you have to come to grips with talking. You're going to have to talk to people.
Right. You're also going to hear, oh, he doesn't look like he's autistic. Autism doesn't have a look.
Right, right. It doesn't have a look. And so, therefore, again, that's why you're going to have to keep your team updated. Because, again, just like the doctors, the teachers don't know. Even the special ed teachers, they don't know. Because autism is not something that's really being talked about in their schools, meaning college. It's not really being talked about a whole lot. And that's something you're going to have to come to grips with. You're going to run into people, like I said, that you expect, oh, you're a PhD in this, and blah, blah. So you should know. And no,
And
they
it's
don't.
not just autism, it's ADHD, it's dyslexia, it's other learning disabilities.
Yes.
So, you're really going to have to educate yourself so that you can educate others as well.
And to be the best advocate
Yes.
for your child. Understand, you are your child's best advocate. You.
Yes.
Now, not the people at school or the people at the daycare center, people at the therapy spots or whatever. You are the greatest person of advocacy for your child because you know your child.
Yes. So I know tonight's episode was to, give you guys some insight into our story. But we've really actually we've tried to sprinkle in some advice as we've gone along, but we've really only touched just the surface of our story. As my husband mentioned, we have 2 other children that have also since been diagnosed with autism. So, there's a lot of twists and turns in our story. So I'm pretty sure there's going to be a part 2 and maybe possibly even a part 3. So you're going to have to stay tuned to hear the rest of our story. So we look forward to you guys tuning back in for episode 2 and future episodes as well.
Absolutely, because this is a lifelong journey and we're inviting you in because we believe in helping others. That is part of why we started MPFAT in the first place, is because during the first part of finding out the diagnosis, Nicole was doing so much research, but it was turning out to be so much red tape. It was going here, there, so on and so forth. So that's why we're doing what we're doing, to bring as much to you as possible to make your life and your autistic child and family's life better. So with that, we'll say thank you for listening, and we'll say peace.
Peace.
Peace, everybody. We thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. And we thank you for tuning in and giving us your time and energy for changing life on the spectrum. If you would like to leave us an email because there's something you want to see on the show or any information that you may need or want to request, go to changinglifeonthespectrum@gmail.com and just drop us an email. And if you want to support the show, we ask you to support the nonprofit that brings you the show, which is McKeel's Path for Autistic Triumph, by going to www.mpfat.org and hitting that donate button so that we can continue to help our families dealing with autism, and we can continue to help them by changing life on the spectrum. Thank you.